This is a 225 Q&A practice test. Plaintiff attorney Mr. Blake, capital B-L-A-K-E. Defense attorney Mr. Arnold, capital A-R-N-O-L-D. And we'll start with plaintiff attorney. Ready? Here we go. And during the course of your shifts, are there ever any kind of roll calls or briefings held prior to watch? Yes, okay. And what happens during those briefings as far as your interaction with officers? Well, I mean, it just really depends on any things that were occurring then. You know, usually we go over the bulletins, things that have occurred prior to our shift, swing shift, day shift. We'll cover anything noticeable that they need to know about officer safety information. We might have some roll call training, just general stuff. Okay, in the course of that, do you ever have one-on-one talks with officers at the start of watch? Only when it's needed. And then during the course of that night, are there times when you may respond to incidents an officer may be assigned to? Yes, so it would be fair to say over the course of time that you were on the graveyard, you had a number of in-field contacts with Dan Arnold to the best of your recollection. Beside this incident here, yes, I'm sure I have. Okay, during any of those interactions, did you ever notice that Dan Arnold was under the influence of a controlled substance while he was working? I've never noticed that. During the course of your and on 2/5/2009, you were one of at least two sergeants on scene. Yes, okay, and then is it the responsible, if a sergeant finds that something isn't going right, can you give direction to an officer to fix something? Yes, okay, you can give officers directions to arrest somebody. Yes, and that's of course if there's a basis for that arrest. Yes, okay, and in the course of the incident on 2/5/2009, would it be fair to call Beth Jacobs on that night a possible victim of crimes? Yes, and so the focus on Beth Jacobs was that she was a victim and not a suspect. Would that be fair to say? At first, yes. Okay, and during the course of your training and experience, is it required that all persons suspected of misdemeanor crimes should be arrested? In other words, is there some discretion as to when an officer may or may not arrest? I would say there's some discretion there, yes, on a misdemeanor violation. Yes, yes. However, would you agree there are some mandatory arrests of persons for misdemeanor violations? Yes. For example, that one might be domestic battery. Yes. Another one might be violation of domestic battery restraining order. Yes. Would you agree that somebody who is under the influence of a controlled substance in their own home is an incident under which an officer could exercise discretion whether or not he would or she would not arrest? I would say he or she could use their discretion, yes. So there's no mandatory requirement based on what you know that an officer must arrest somebody if they come across somebody under the influence of controlled substance. I'm not sure how to answer that, counsel. There would be discretion in that case. Would that be fair to say? Yes, okay. And would it also, you train your officers that before they make an arrest, they have to have sufficient evidence connecting a person to the crime before they make that arrest? Facts and evidence, yes. Okay, so what the situation is, there are syringes in the apartment and there are several occupants of that apartment and the home renter denies knowledge or possession of the syringes. Would you agree that would not be a sufficient basis to make an arrest of that homeowner or renter? Yes. Would it be fair to say that Beth Jacobs, during your time with her 2/5/2009, that she was mellow? Yes. And would you agree that you would have an obligation to look into the facts if a person seemed to appear to be upset? What was that again, counsel? If in the course of a call or an incident you saw that suspect or individual was upset, would you agree that you would have some obligation to check into that distress? That I would have an obligation? Yes. Not always. Sergeant, you were interviewed on 5/4/2010 by Detective Richards and Detective Lathrop. Is that true? Yes. And on that date it was your belief that, well, let me ask you this. Do you know, I'll show you what's pre-marked as People's 18 on your screen. Do you know this female? No. Okay, is it safe to say that you don't remember that night altogether, Sergeant? I don't remember that night altogether. Well, do you remember? Do I remember details? Yes. No, I don't. Such as counsel was asking you if you remember this young lady's demeanor. Do you remember those questions? Yes. And is it safe to say that you don't even remember what she looks like? Didn't really pay any attention to her. Okay, now, Sergeant, when you were interviewed on 5/4/2010, isn't it true that it was your belief that that person was in fact arrested? Yes. And did you leave the scene prior? You were on the scene for how long, Sergeant, would you say? okay, about, well, I was in the house for about 15 to 20 minutes, okay. I'm not taking into account being outside during containment and the call-ups to have people come out of the apartment. It would have been longer than 20 minutes. Sir, but you're a sergeant. Is it your testimony that even though you were a sergeant, you left prior to the other officers? Yes, yes. Is that common? Yes. Isn't it true, Sergeant, that there's someone that's referred to as an initial officer who kind of runs the scene, maybe not runs, but is in charge of the scene of the investigation? Yes, yes. And the person in charge of the investigation, they're in charge of 1, collecting evidence, right? Yes. 2, interviewing different witnesses, right? Yes. And 3, making different arrests. Isn't that true? Yes. All right. When you left, Sergeant, isn't it true that Dan Arnold was still there? Yes, he was. When you left him trusting him as the person that was running the scene. What was the word we used before? Not running, but in charge of the scene of the investigation. Yes. Did you trust him? Yes. You expect that if he found 40 different syringes, well, I'm going to show you what's pre-marked as People's 52. Did you ever see these syringes? No. All right, a word list. We have Dan Arnold, capital D-A-N, new word, capital A-R-N-O-L-D. Beth Jacobs, capital B-E-T-H, new word, capital J-A-C-O-B-S. Richards, capital R-I-C-H-A-R-D-S. Lathrop, capital L-A-T-H-R-O-P. And that is it for the word list, and that will conclude our 225 Q&A practice test.